Recognition, power, and influence is your birthright, and this podcast shows you how to get there. Welcome to episode number 254. Today's episode is the episode that I never wanted to record. And in particular, I am a person who traditionally shies away from talking about politics. And a lot of that comes from my people-pleasing tendencies, but also because I am so hyper aware of the differences of opinions and wanting to give everybody else their space and time to process certain situations that they might come across in their life. But I also know that I have a obligation and also an opportunity to be a voice for a lot of women who aren't able to speak up and to share their opinions and their thoughts and their feelings around the most recent presidential election in the United States. So I'm using today's episode as that platform. I hope that it is of service and that it brings some perspective to many of you who are listening or who are regular listeners to my podcast. All right, let's get started.
Welcome to Women Changing Leadership. I am your host, Stacy Mayer, and I teach you how to get promoted, get paid, and bring your whole self to the leadership table. I am on a mission to change organizations from the C-suite out because women are the new face of leadership, and we are doing it on our terms.
Hello, corporate badasses. Welcome to another episode of Women Changing Leadership. I am your host, Stacy Mayer, and super excited, as always, to be here with you again this week. I had a very different podcast episode planned to record this week, but after Tuesday's election results in the United States, I felt like in the intro to this podcast, I was going to ramble on and on about my thoughts and how I'm processing the election results. And so instead of doing the podcast episode that I had planned, I am going to talk a little bit about my feelings and thoughts and also provide some perspective and context. I know that for many of you, the grieving process is real, and for a lot of you, you're going to be very directly impacted by the decisions made in the United States this week. So, yeah, I'm kind of processing out loud. And then next week, I will record the episode that I had planned. So, the first thing that comes to mind is that I recognize and I want to honor the fact that I live in a bubble. First of all, I am a white female, which automatically puts me at a different perspective and also a different level of privilege than I know that a lot of women of color experience on a regular basis. I also know that because I am a woman, I experience things through a very different lens than my white male counterparts or even my male counterparts. And I also live in Berkeley, California. So, the day-to-day life that I experience on a regular basis is quite different than what many of you do across the world. And also, I can get surprised by certain things and feel quite disappointed when you look at the map of red across the country and then you see that Kamala Harris lost by such a wide margin to a person that doesn't even quite make sense to me. So I want to first acknowledge my privilege, my perspective, where I come from. Now, another perspective that I have that I also want to say is that I get to work with a lot of really talented, brilliant women every single day. And these are women who are single-handedly closing the gender gap, breaking glass ceilings, paving a path for themselves. But they're also women who are getting shut down on a regular basis. And I remember a while back sharing, I think it was on social media, a series of posts around some of the things that the women who I work with are told, like very directly and very bluntly to their face. Like, you know, I have women who still in 2024 are being told to smile more. I have women who are being told that the only reason that they got promoted is because they're a woman. I have women who are being told that they need to sit it out, prove themselves, so on and so on, while a male leader who has only been there for 6 months gets promoted ahead of them. I have people being told straight up to their face that when they do get promoted, that they won't be successful. I have women who get yelled at in private situations, like literally like yelled at, like the male will raise their voice to them still, usually behind closed doors when nobody else is around, and treat them differently, consistently getting asked to take notes, so on and so on. This is all real and it's what's happening for women today. And one of the things that I really strive to do for my clients and for you, the listener, is to normalize some of this behavior. And the reason why that's so important is because it would be very easy to be so angry by this behavior to do one of two things. One is if you don't normalize it, as in saying this happens a lot, and women in this example of this election is that we were basically told, politics aside, like you could say that, people didn't like Kamala Harris's politics and some of the changes she was going to make. But also, I think there was a very clear and loud message that we didn't want her, capital H, capital E, capital R, in the White House. And that's just how I feel. So that happens as well for my clients. And I think it's very easy to do one of two things. If you don't know what's happening and that maybe the voice was loud and clear, say, we don't want her in the White House, then what happens is that you'll internalize all of the mistakes that you made. And this is where I think 80% of women kind of lie, because this is the whole reason that imposter syndrome exists, is that we internalize these mistakes and we make them about us. And so maybe perhaps before you started listening to me, before like the first, 3/4 of your career, you also internalize these mistakes because women are very good at taking responsibility. Like we make everything our fault. Like this is a thing. And I think it's actually a quality. I think it's a strength. I think it's fantastic that we take responsibility. And then also it ends up hurting us. So we say, oh my God, what could I have done better? Maybe I just didn't push hard enough. Maybe I wasn't good at my job. Maybe I should just wait it out and like get some more experience, get some more degrees, and we make it about ourselves and all of the flaws that we have and everything that we did wrong. And, from a stereotypical standpoint, a lot of men aren't doing that, right? They're just like, oh, that's on them. They don't know what they're missing out on. And so instead of internalizing it, and you could sort of think about this, I mean, my hope and my wishes, and I feel like Kamala Harris, at least how she presents herself, is not going to be one of those people who is going to make it all about her. Like, I screwed up, I did these things. And you could say, oh, well, maybe she didn't have enough time to campaign and so on. But really, it's like at the end of the day, and you can hopefully look at it from the outside and say it has nothing to do with her. And I really do believe that it's important for you to first acknowledge that. Now, the thing that happens on the other side when we look at it and we say, oh, they just didn't want me, a woman, in the White House, or they just didn't want me, a woman, on the leadership table, is that we get very bitter, we get very jaded, we get very judgmental, we get really pissed off, we get really angry. All of these things are warranted, and I definitely recommend that you go to one of those like slam rooms or whatever we can break a bunch of crap and just like get all of the anger out. I haven't been, but I'm contemplating it. I think that it is important for you to be pissed, to be frustrated, to be angry. but not at the expense, again, of yourself and your leadership and the mission that you have and the voice that you have and who you are and who we need at the leadership table. So I want to give you a couple of examples. So the woman that I spoke about, I'll call her Janice. She literally was having meetings on a regular basis. This guy was not even her boss. He was yelling at her one-on-one. Whenever he was in a group setting, he would just keep his mouth shut. But one-on-one, he would put her down. When she did get promoted, the very first thing he said to her was that she was going to fail. Like, straight up, you're going to fail. And so what we were able to do is move her into her own lane. And so what people started to notice, because this guy was, a jerk to everybody, is that she handled him better than most people. So she just I was like, you just need to have less meetings with this guy. When you do have meetings, get a third person in there, start inviting your boss, tell her she needs to be in these meetings as well. And so what started to happen was she was distancing herself and protecting herself from these crude remarks. And then she was able to drive her own career on its own, aside from him. People started to notice that she was really like an expert at managing him. How do you do that? How do you do that? And then eventually, long story short, she was eventually promoted to the C-suite. That particular leader was let go at her organization, and she lived happily ever after. But the thing is that she had to focus on herself and what she could do and the impact that she could make, regardless of if the people at the top wanted her there or not. Another situation is I had a woman who worked with me, and I'll call her Rachel, and she was primed to be the successor for her boss. When her boss put in his notice that he would be leaving, they decided to do an open search to fill his position. So she was set up to be his successor. He wanted her to be his successor. Human resources, everybody at the organization knew that she was going to be his successor, and they wanted to do an open search. Well, luckily for her, she wasn't naive, and she decided that she wanted to be prepared for this situation. She wanted to make sure she had strong allies and strong support along the way. And so that's why when she started working with me, it's because she was like, well, it's not a slam dunk. I have to make sure I actually work for it. And so she did everything that she needed to do to set herself up to be successful. As a successor, she did a great job in the interviews. She, noticed that there was a couple of new leaders at the organization that were really pushing back. Like they were kind of ignoring her. They didn't really want to talk to her. So when she did the interview process, it started to get cut short. And they were telling her that it was going to be a long, drawn out interview process. And then she had like one interview, and then they weren't really getting back to her. Long story short, this new leader at her organization ended up bringing in a male leader that he had already worked with, and he put him in as the new leader in the C-suite. And so she was now going to be reporting to him. Typical, right? And kind of like what she thought might happen anyway. She was afraid that this would happen, and then she wanted to fight it, and she did. But here's what I really want to tell you. Is that when she told me the news that this happened, she was disappointed, of course. She was a bit angry, a bit frustrated. But do you know what she wasn't? She wasn't beating herself up. She knew that she did nothing, zero wrong. There's like a book, He's Just Not That Into You. It's the same kind of deal, right? She knew that she could not have done anything different to be put in that role. So she had integrity. She had strength. She also knew the writing on the wall was that this company did not want her in the C-suite. Like, whatever. And now go back to this level of responsibility that we all take as women. She gave her heart and soul for this company. She had been working there for over a decade. She worked all hours. She traveled all the time. She always jumped at a moment's notice, gave it 150%. She completely turned around her team's reviews, like the feedback, the employee surveys were like night and day for her team compared to the rest of the organization. Give, 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 give. And once this happened, she realized they're not that into me. And so she pulled back. She was like, you know what? This is a job. They're treating me like it's a job. I'm going to treat it like it's a job. She still gives to her team, but she gives to the people who matter, the people who are actually listening, the people who actually support her. And in the meantime, she is now, in a good way, pushed to find a role that actually suits her, where she is wanted, where she can make the impact that she wants to make somewhere else. So she's able to continue going on her leadership path. All of this happens from, quote unquote, going for it. Like, we have to go in integrity. We have to know, we have to put ourselves out there. If Kamala Harris hadn't run for presidency, we would not be having this conversation. She needed to go for it. We need to see it. It's important for us as a country, for the people like me who live in the bubbles, to realize that the world is bigger than us, that there's still a lot of people and a lot of power working against us having that seat, having that voice at the table. Even if it's not their individual words, there's generation after generation after generation saying, we don't want her, H-E-R, here. We don't want her here. This is a man's club. This is just for us. This is our party. This is our space to be in and to be ourselves, to kick our shoes off. We don't need these other voices, these diverse voices at the table. But there is a way for us to get there, and it happens on an individual basis in your own personal integrity. So whatever that might be. So if you're feeling frustrated and you're seeing that glass ceiling once again being put up, I want to encourage you not to push forward, shatter at all costs. Make sure that everybody knows how badass you are. No, I want you to figure out your own lane, to make the impact that you want to make, grow, grow, grow. If you want to be in the C-suite, you are going to be in the C-suite. If you want to be not in the C-suite and you want to start your own business, go start your own business, but figure out your lane. Figure out the impact, figure out the allies around you. As you know, I do stakeholder interviews for my clients inside of the leadership table. And I have this way of, when I interview people, I can sniff out who is your actual ally. The person who you think is your ally is typically not your ally, because that's the person who we want to be like, who we idolize, who we think is amazing. But it's not always the person who can support us, who has actual influence, who can do anything for our career. And so sometimes it's this other person who hasn't really said that much to us, but all they have to do is flip a switch and then our entire career becomes possible. So knowing who your allies are, truly, who are those people who are going to stand up on your behalf and push you forward, is such an incredible skill. So go out, find your allies, find your own lane, get yourself promoted into a higher level leadership position, because your promotion matters. It always has mattered. I was going to say it matters now more than ever, but it has always mattered. Every single woman who gets themselves into a position of influence matters. It ripples out. And eventually we're going to start to see this expand and expand and expand. And the more that even the minorities can see and have their eyes opened to the rest of the world and what is working against us, the more empowered we can be to figure it out on our own terms. Thank you so much for listening to my rant. I know so many of you cannot rant online. You cannot even rant to your friends and family because they don't support you. I encourage you to find your people. And if it helps at all, use this episode as your voice. You can share it with other people. Sometimes it's easier to say, I agree with this, than to be able to use your own voice. Why? Because there's a hell of a lot of people working against us and you need to, be smart, right? But I am proud to be that voice. I have the ability, I have the privilege, I have the platform to be your voice. And I take that privilege and that honor very, very seriously. Thank you again for listening, and I'll see you next week with the episode that I was supposed to record. All right, take care. Bye. before you go, I have a question for you. Do you know how close you are to your next promotion? Really? Not what your boss has told you, not what you even believe to be true, but have you actually taken the time to sit down, take an assessment, review the 5 categories that it takes to get promoted into senior executive leadership positions and decided where you fall in each category and given yourself a ranking on a scale of 1 to 10 of how close you are to getting your next promotion? Have you done this? Well, now's your chance. If that feels interesting to you and you're like, hey, I want to know exactly how close I might actually be or how far away you might be and what it's going to take to get you even closer, then I invite you to take my promotability quiz. This is a quiz that I put together with practical tips that actually tell you where you're lacking and where you're winning. What are the areas that you actually need to improve and not necessarily what your boss is telling you all the time so that you can take concrete steps towards landing that next promotion and changing the face of the leadership table. Go to yourpromotabilityscore.com to take your free assessment today.